Okay, everybody, this is the video I've put off for a little while. Um, I know it's going to ruffle some feathers, and I know that there's a whole big idea that if you can't color mix or don't want to color mix, that you are somehow, I guess, less than as an artist, and I call bullshit. I have mentioned several times before that I don't like to color mix. And that said, I don't particularly care for the primary color palettes because you are forced to do a lot of color mixing. So most of your, some of your primary palettes will just have 3 colors. A lot of them will have a split primary where they have 3 warm and 3 cool. So I did not choose the ones that are, I guess, typically in the color palettes in part. A lot of times they will pick phthalo blue for the cool blue, but it has a very high tinting strength against some of the other stuff, so I didn't use it. I also don't particularly care for lemon yellow, so I chose to use Hansa Yellow Light. So my warm colors are cadmium yellow, ultramarine, Pyrrole Scarlet. My cool colors are the Hansa Yellow Light, Cerulean, and the Pyrrole Red. And I believe that everything except the Cerulean on this is a Daniel Smith, and this is a Winsor Newton. So, when you go to kindergarten, you are told, yellow and blue make green, red and yellow make orange, blue and red make purple. These are all true statements. But the versions of those that you get can vary greatly. And this is true where understanding color theory does help you. So I debated whether or not I wanted to do this on camera and mix these up, and decided it was just a little too time consuming and tedious. And just, I knew this video was going to get long, so I decided against it. So I pre-mixed these on this paper so you could see. Sometimes mixing them in a dish or something is a little more helpful than doing it on the paper. I actually did it on the paper. This paper does have kind of a funny texture, so I do see some settling on some of these. And it looks like my ultramarine. A little teeny tiny bit of granulation that I'm getting across some of these. So on your warms, I mixed the warms to create your green, orange, and purple. Mixed cools to do the same thing. One of the big things that I do not like about mixing, especially with a primary palette, is that I feel for the most part, the colors tend to be kind of muddy and dull. I noticed this especially on the greens and the purples. Oranges, I feel like, are kind of, I don't know, maybe they're just a little easier. Both of these, I guess, are usable greens. I'm just not a big fan. Neither one of them is really green the way I think of green, and I think that's part of the reason I don't like these more subdued colors. When I think of a color like purple or green, I'm thinking of something very vibrant, very bright. A purple crayon, the green grass. Neither one of these is really grass colored. So those are the things that I think of when I think of these colors. Now, when I think of blue, yes, this ultramarine blue, absolutely. When I think of yellow, definitely these yellows. When I think of red, I'm probably going to go more towards a cool-based red in my head. That's just kind of what my brain goes to. I also chose these because they were all single pigment colors for me. So you're not muddying the waters. When you mix with colors that have multiple pigments, you run the risk of making really muddy colors because sometimes those pigments just don't play well together. And it does require more knowledge on pigments, in my opinion. But when I did these, you can see, like I said, I mixed these on. I did get a little separation on my purple, and I think that's in part just because of my blues. But like I said, these greens are usable, and you can skew these a little more if you wanted to. I tried to kind of make them mid-range, I guess. They're usable, but they don't really do it for me. Out of the oranges, I like the cool orange better, actually. And as far as purple goes, I don't like any of these. This is a big thing that I just dislike with mixing. There's a lot of variables that just, I'd rather just have the color, and then I know it's predictable. Like I said, any of these can be skewed, you know, if I wanted this. So for me, violet means it's a little more red. I know some people are kind of the opposite, and purple is a little more blue. So I could have skewed this either way if I'd wanted. Like I said, I tried to make a mid-range. These purples are just muddy. They're ugly. I would never use these in a painting. You can also mix your warm and your cool sides. You have to be careful because sometimes you will get something really, really muddy, like you did when I did this cool blue and this warm red. This just not a great color. This is a hair better. There is a trick to mixing purples, and I'll show you in a minute. Like I said, you just have to be careful. I actually kind of like this green over the other greens. It's still not the green I think of. Yes, we have a lot of different greens in nature. We have a lot of different versions of colors in nature, which is maybe why I like having all the colors. But I just feel like with these primary palettes, you're just very limited. Yes, you can skew these to create, I guess, what you would consider more colors. Are they really though, or are they just different saturations and different, like, I don't know, hue isn't the right word. I'm just not a fan. If that's what you like, and you really love to make colors and you really like to see what you can come up with, I think that's awesome. If you don't, and you're like me and it frustrates you, and for me, it is tedious and time consuming, and I don't like it. I'm here to paint, not to make colors. So, you know, like I said, if you like mixing colors and you have fun doing that, by all means. I'm not trying to burst anybody's bubble on this. This is just why I don't like to do it. So when you create these secondary colors, these are now all multi-pigment colors, in this case 2 pigments. You can probably tweak these a little further if you had a little bit of white or a little bit of neutral tint or a little bit of black, but then we're kind of getting away from this primary palette. Primary palettes can be fun in that seeing what you can mix up. And the primary palette, you can create different ones. These are just the colors I chose. These are the ones I had handy. I think Daniel Smith uses a Quin Coral. I want to say, is it for the red? For their warm red, I think. And that's fine. A lot of brands will use more of a magenta type color for your cool reds, and that's okay. And you're going to get different, your colors are going to vary depending on what your base colors are, obviously. I don't want to have to spend the time to go back and forth. I find mixing and being like, oh, well, you know, that's too yellow, I got to add a little more blue. Oh, now it's too blue, I got to add a little more yellow. I just find that annoying and frustrating, and I don't care for it. I also feel like mixing colors is just inconsistent, and because I have ADHD, that really bothers me. So if I'm mixing a color and I am not going to get the same results every single time, you know, maybe this time I dipped my brush in a little more yellow, and next time I don't get that much yellow. Those are the kinds of things that my brain is not okay with. And that's why I don't like to mix up some of this stuff. You know, even if you know the formula to get back to that exact shade or that exact saturation, or, you know, that level of transparency, those kinds of things. It's just a lot of back and forth. And I've watched videos where some well-known YouTubers have done all this, and I just want to be like, why don't you just have this color on hand? Or you look at it and and then they're like, oh, well, you have to add a little burnt sienna. Oh, come on. Like, that's just too much. And I'm just not interested. So I don't like knowing that you're going to be inconsistent. And again, that's part of how my brain is wired, and it's just, it is what it is. I'm not knocking somebody if they do like it. I just don't. I very frequently, like I said, just don't like the versions that you get with some of these. I just don't. I'm sorry. But I also wanted to talk about, so as you can see, I actually started to do it over here and then realized I needed to skew it the other way. Let me get that out of the way. So I decided to see if I could make some of these common colors, I guess that some people would consider convenience colors. I feel like Hooker's Green is very commonly a color that you get in multiple palettes. So I wanted to recreate it. I looked at my version. It happened to be Phthalo Green Yellow Shade and Quinn Gold. So here are our parts, and here's the sum of the parts. I could have tweaked this a little more, but overall it's reasonably similar. This one is to me a little duller, and I think it's because it probably needs a hair more phthalo green. New Gamboge is also a color that they tend to put in the primary palettes as a warm. I'm not a huge fan of this. I don't know why. I think maybe because it skews a little orange. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan, but it is just a Quinn Red and a Nickel Azo Yellow. So here's your Quinn Red, here's your Nickel Azo Yellow. I did a lot of mixing. As you can see, I ended up really orange, thinned it out a little bit, and got pretty close up here. But again, it took a minute. Yeah, just not a big fan. Imperial Purple is one of my favorite purples, and it is just Ultramarine and Quinn Violet. Mix them together. Got a pretty decent version of that. One of the things I also wanted to do this, not mix these on screen, is because I wanted them to dry so that the colors would be truer. So in this case, I took Paranone Orange, which is PO43. It is a single pigment color, and tried to recreate it. It is a warm color, so I went with Cad Yellow and the Pyrrole Scarlet. As you can see, I did get pretty close. This is probably a hair more red, but it can be done. But then you also, when you're doing this, if you want to tweak this color, now you've got a multi-pigment color. So if you want to tweak it with something else, you run the risk of dulling it or muddying it, or, you know, giving yourself issues, because now you've got a double pigment color as opposed to the single pigment of the Paranone Orange. Like I said, as far as the oranges go, I do feel like they're probably the easiest to recreate as opposed to the greens and the purples. If you want to mix a decent purple, you need a blue and a pink or a magenta color. Red just doesn't quite cut it to me. I don't know why. It just doesn't. But this gives you a little better purple in my opinion. And you kind of saw that up here to get the, in fact, I would say this is actually maybe a hair closer to that Imperial Purple. But that is kind of one of the keys to getting a decent purple. And I know there's a thing out there about using a warm blue and a cool red, I think, or vice versa, that gives you the most solid purple. I've played with all of it, and yeah, okay. This is about as close to a good purple as I can get. So there's also talk about mixing gives you the most natural colors. I guess that's just how you look at it. You know, a lot of colors are pretty vibrant in nature. Yes, we don't see a lot of things like purple necessarily in nature, but it is out there. So you see things like clover or wisteria or eggplant, you know, or even blueberries can skew kind of purple. There is purple out there, and it's not always a dull, muddy color. The same for things like blue, a really vibrant blue sky, morning glory flowers, bluebells. There's so many different shades of blues out there. And the same for your greens. You know, your grass green is not necessarily going to be the same green as foliage on your flowers. And so the idea of a natural color, nah, I just, it holds less weight for me. And I realize that some of that's just going to be based on what you're painting. You know, if you're doing a lot of florals or landscapes or something, then you probably are going to back off on some of the brightness on greens. Like this is not going to come across as a natural green as opposed to a mix here. It's just not, and that's okay. I'm not, like I said, I'm not knocking either way. Everything when you paint is about your personal preference, and everybody else be damned. So do what you're comfortable with. If you enjoy mixing your colors and you think that's awesome, then by all means, please go for it. I would never knock somebody because they like it, but I do often hear kind of an elitist attitude about if you can't mix or you don't mix or you don't want to mix and you're using convenience colors, then you're somehow less than. And I think that's a load of crap. We're all out here painting for fun because we enjoy it, because we want to. And if mixing your colors takes away from that, then why? There's nothing that says that you have to do this. There's no rule book out there that absolutely demands that you do that and make your colors instead of buying them. I hate that type of elitist attitude. It frustrates me. It irritates me. I'm just really, really not a fan of that. Artists for everybody. No matter how you do it, no matter how you want to do it, no matter what your learning is, no matter what your skill level is, artists for everybody. That's the end of that conversation. So the next time somebody tells you that you're not a good artist or you're never going to be a good artist, or how dare you consider yourself an artist if you don't want to mix all these colors, if you don't want to make natural colors, you know what, screw them. That's not, you do you, and you enjoy it, and don't listen to those people. So for me personally, I kind of want all the colors. I've mentioned before that I don't mind tweaking a color to skew it like I wanted. Like this Paranone orange, it's a little bright, and I can see me toning it down just a little bit if I wanted. You know, I could add a hair more red. Obviously, you can use your complement color, and you can use a blue in it and tone it down. You could use a touch of neutral tint and tone it down if you wanted to do that, and that's fine. Again, that just kind of comes back to what your preference is. But this is why I actually prefer like 12 color palettes, because yes, you can mix your colors, but a good solid green, a good solid purple that you can tweak, to me is better than creating them from scratch. Also, yes, you can create browns. Yes, you can create a black. Yes, you can create grays. But a lot of times those, especially I've noticed the browns, are just very muddy looking. If I want something a little more pure, then I just want a brown pigment. That's why I like those 12 color palettes, because you get all of your primary colors. You get a couple of pre-mixed, like you usually get a purple, you usually get a green, you'll get usually like a raw sienna, burnt umber, that kind of thing. You'll get a black, you'll get a white. Honestly, I could care less about the black or the white. But you get some of those other colors that, again, you can tweak, but you don't have to try to recreate from scratch and get some of those muddy tones. Like, I've seen the browns, not interested, hard pass. Give me a good burnt umber and I can darken it or lighten it as I see fit. You know, tweak it to my satisfaction if I need something a little different and I don't already have it. So, yes, you can create a lot of these colors, but honestly, for me, if I'm gonna have to go through all the trouble to recreate this to get this kind of green, I'd rather just have it. I know it's gonna be the same every time. I know it's a color that I like, that I can vibe with or whatever, and I also know it's a color that I can tweak if I'm so inclined. That's kind of how I feel about it. So, like I said, you know, these primary palettes are fine. A lot of people insist that you have to learn on them and learn how to mix and all that, and I call bullshit. If that's not your thing and you're like me and you just don't want to do it, that's perfectly acceptable. If you do want to do it, you find it interesting, you want to see what you come up with, by all means, please do that. But don't let anybody tell you that you're less than if you don't want to, or you just want to buy all the colors. If you're in a position you can do that, rock on. God knows I've got enough colors around to probably do a couple kindergarten classes. Art is about you and having fun and enjoying yourself and creating and making yourself happy. It's not about pleasing critics or the people who say you have to do something that you don't want to do. Remember that, because the rest of it, it's not really important. The naysayers and the people who are going to have something to say, well, they're always going to be around and they're always going to have something to say, and that's fine, but you don't have to give them any weight. You don't have to give them any credence, and you don't have to let them affect how you do what you're doing if what you're doing is making you happy. So I hope that kind of clears up why I dislike mixing. Hopefully it doesn't stir up too much controversy. I know that's a hot topic for some people, but you know, this is how I do it for me and what I'm happy with. So like I said, everybody pick what you're happy with and go from there. If you do want to try limited palettes and see what you can come up with, that's great. I do play with that sometimes, just to kind of break down what I'm going to get color wise. I do sometimes play with white. I know that white helps you create some skin tones, and I do like that. I have played with just coming up with colors that are kind of neat and different. I mixed one called Twilight, and I can't even remember. I've got it written down somewhere, that I will probably actually mix up and put in a pan because I just liked how it turned out. I want to say it was Rose Madder and something, I think. I don't think it was Ultramarine, but anyway, so just do what you do, and like I said, don't listen to people that say you have to do something a certain way, because you don't. And if you're like me and you don't want to do your mixing, you just want to buy the color, you are no less an artist or no less anything because you don't want to do that. And that's something I wish we could hear more about. I have found some of these blogs and sites to be very judgy about that kind of thing, and that's unfortunate. So do what you enjoy, figure out how you want to do your palette, and then just paint. And everybody else, well, that's a them problem, not a you problem. Have a good day, guys.